He didn't just pull me out of the water, he made me want to live for the first time. You'd be surprised how fast your body gives up when your heart already has. But what shocked me most wasn't the freezing river swallowing me wholly, it was the warmth of his hand dragging me back up, like I was worth saving. I hadn't planned on living past that Friday. The Mississippi River had been my quiet exit plan, the last line in a suicide note I didn't have the courage to write. I was tired. Tired of pretending. Of smiling when I wanted to scream. Of dodging my mother's eyes when she asked if I had a girlfriend. Of pretending, no, I'm just not dating right now, was the same as, no, I'm gay and terrified. The current was strong that day, stronger than I'd expected. It pulled at me with greedy fingers, welcoming me into silence. For one brief, beautiful second, I felt nothing. Then a hand tore through the dark, yanking me toward the surface. Air burned my lungs. Voices shouted. Arms wrapped around my shaking body. And above me, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, was the boy who would ruin my death and remake my life. His name was Caleb. I swear to God, if you try that again, I'll throw you back in myself, he said, panting. It was the stupidest, most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. My clothes had been stripped and replaced with a thin gown. My mother sat in the corner, eyes puffy and red, whispering prayers in Vietnamese under her breath. My father paced like a caged tiger, glancing at me with a fury I couldn't meet. I wished Caleb were there. He wasn't. Not then. Not until the second psych eval, when he showed up in jeans, a threadbare hoodie, and a look like he belonged anywhere but a hospital hallway. I'm not family, he told the nurse. But I saved his life. That's gotta count for something. It did. He sat beside my bed and handed me a bottle of Gatorade. You're lucky I was running that day. You picked a pretty public spot to drown. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. He waited. I wasn't trying to be seen. Yeah, he said quietly. I figured that out when you didn't scream. I looked away. Shame burned hotter than the foredrip in my arm. He stayed for 20 minutes. Said nothing else. Just sat there, staring out the window like he was keeping watch. When he left, he slipped a folded napkin onto my tray. Call me. If you want. I've been there. I didn't call for 4 days. When I did, it was midnight. My voice shook. I don't know why I'm calling. He replied without hesitation. Because you're not ready to be alone. We met at an all-night diner just off the highway. It smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sit, he said, nodding to the booth. We talked until dawn. About being gay in a town that thought queer meant contagious. About fathers who wouldn't meet your eyes. About churches that prayed the sin out of you until your soul felt hollow. About the fear that if people knew, you'd lose everything. You ever told anyone? He asked. Does a therapist count? He laughed. It was the first real sound I'd made in weeks. No, he said. But it's a start. Over the next month, we met almost every night. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we just sat by the river where he'd found me, listening to water lap at the rocks, not saying the things we didn't know how to say. Once, I asked him why he'd saved me. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at me and said, because someone did it for me once. And it changed everything. Who? My older brother, he said softly. Before he died. I didn't ask how. I just nodded and watched the river with him, feeling the ache in my chest shift into something that wasn't pain anymore. The night I kissed him was the first night I felt real again. We'd been watching some terrible sci-fi movie on his couch. I don't even remember the plot, just the way his fingers brushed mine, how he leaned closer without leaning in all the way, waiting, patient. It was me who closed the distance. It was him who smiled into it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel wrong. I felt alive. Of course, it wasn't simple after that. Nothing worth it ever is. When my mother found the text messages, she cried for hours, asking what she'd done wrong. My father didn't say a word, just left the house for 3 days. When he came back, he acted like I didn't exist. I nearly disappeared again. But this time, when I stood by the river, Caleb found me first. "I didn't save you just once," he said, gripping my shoulders. "I'll do it as many times as it takes." I cried in his arms until I couldn't stand. He didn't let go. We moved to Chicago 3 months later. 2 boys, 1 bruised soul between them, trying to make sense of a world that had nearly broken us. We got jobs. We got a cat. We got used to being scared, but not alone. Sometimes I still dream of the water. Of sinking. But now, when I wake up gasping, there's a hand in mine. Warm. Steady. His. And I remember. He didn't just pull me out of the river. He gave me something to swim toward. He gave me a reason to breathe. He made me want to live for the very first time. Chicago was louder than I expected. And colder. The first few weeks were filled with chaos: job hunting, apartment hunting, pretending we knew how to build a life from scratch. But there was something peaceful about building from the ground up. No expectations. No ghosts from home. Just the 2 of us and the silence we were slowly learning to fill with laughter. Caleb got a job at a record store on the north side. I started bussing tables at a Vietnamese restaurant on Argyle Street. The owners liked that I spoke the language. I liked that they didn't ask questions. We came home exhausted most nights, collapsing onto the mattress on the floor of our too small studio. But there was warmth in the way he'd curl around me, even when the radiator failed and our breath fogged in the dark. "This isn't the life I thought I'd have," I whispered once, my fingers tracing lazy shapes across his chest. "Me neither," he murmured back. "But it's the one we've got. And I kind of like it." I didn't answer, but I kissed him. Because some truths don't need words. But the past has a way of knocking when you least expect it. One evening, as I was clearing dishes in the back, the manager called me to the front. "Ko nuoi tim em," she said, eyes wide. "Someone's here for you." I wiped my hands and stepped into the dining room and froze. It was my mother. She stood stiffly near the doorway, clutching a purse like it might shield her from the city. Her eyes scanned the restaurant until they landed on me. Her mouth trembled. For a second, I wanted to run. To bolt out the back and vanish into the alleys of uptown. But my feet stayed rooted. "Me," I breathed. She blinked, tears filling her eyes. "Con gi mi esi kong di tim con sol." We sat outside, on a bench beneath flickering streetlights. The sounds of the red line rattled above us like a heartbeat I didn't trust. "I didn't think you'd want to see me," I said. "I didn't," she replied, voice sharp. Then softened. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you. I still don't understand this. Your choices. But I love you. I want to try." I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not yet. She reached into her bag and pulled out a Tupperware container. "Me now can chua. Beat con tik ma." My heart cracked open. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it arrives in a plastic container filled with sour soup and home. When I told Caleb what happened, he just smiled. "Told you," he said. "Sometimes they come around. Sometimes they don't. But either way, you keep living." I kissed him so hard he dropped his keys. Things weren't perfect after that. My father still refused to speak to me. But my mother called every Sunday, even if just to ask if I was eating enough. Sometimes she asked about Caleb, though she never said his name. Only, Ka Ban Du. It was enough. But then Caleb stopped answering my questions. At first, it was small. He forgot what day it was. Misplaced his keys. Slept through his shift at the record store. I'm just tired, he insisted. City life is loud. But I could see it in his eyes. The shadows. The way he smiled with half his mouth. The way he stared at the river on our evening walks like it might still hold him. One night, I came home to find him curled up in the bathroom, lights off, knees to his chest. "Hey," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "You with me?" He nodded, but he didn't meet my eyes. "I'm slipping," he said. "I don't know why. I don't want to. But I can feel it. Like fog in my brain. Like there's a weight I can't shake." My heart clenched. "Then let me carry it with you." He looked at me for a long time. "I don't want to be a burden." "You saved my life," I said. "That wasn't a burden. That was love." He broke then. Not loudly. Just a slow, quiet unraveling into my arms. We got help. Therapy. Medication. Support groups. Some days were worse than others. But he stayed. And so did I. Because love isn't just the easy nights. It's the mornings when the sun hurts and getting out of bed feels like climbing Everest. It's sitting beside someone in silence and making them feel less alone. It's holding on even when everything in you wants to let go. The first time we said, "I love you," wasn't in bed, or during a kiss, or even in a moment of happiness. It was at a laundromat, of all places. Caleb had spilled detergent all over the floor and I started laughing so hard I cried. He looked at me, flustered and ridiculous, and said, "God, I love you." Just like that. Simple. True. And I said it back. Because I did. With everything I had. A year passed. Then 2. We moved into a bigger place. Got a second cat. Caleb started writing again, poems, mostly. Small, aching things that made me cry at breakfast. I enrolled in community college. Took classes in psychology. I wanted to understand pain. Not just mine but his. Everyone's. I wanted to be the hand that reached into the water. Sometimes, I'd go back to that bridge in my dreams. Feel the cold again. The weight. The pull. But then I'd see him, Caleb, standing on the edge, reaching for me with fire in his eyes. And I'd remember. I wasn't drowning anymore. I was alive. And I wanted to be. Because of him. We were doing okay. Not perfect. Not magical. But okay. And sometimes, okay felt like a miracle. Then his mother called. It was the first time I'd ever heard Caleb's phone ring and watched his entire body turn to stone. He stared at the screen like it might detonate. I knew that name. Not because I'd met her but because he'd never talked about her. "Are you gonna answer it?" I asked gently. "No," he said, and let it ring out. It didn't stop there. She called again 2 days later. Then a text. "Your father is dying. Please come home." Home. That word didn't sit right in his mouth. "Will you go?" I asked him that night, our legs tangled under the blanket. He stared at the ceiling. He hasn't spoken to me in 6 years. Not since I came out. Not a word. I waited. He told me I was already dead to him. Guess now he wants to make it official. I didn't push. But I knew what he needed. "You don't have to forgive him," I said. But you can still show up for yourself. He didn't reply. But he didn't sleep either. 2 weeks later, we drove to Ohio. I let him control the music. He picked sad indie songs and gospel hymns that reminded him of church. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was soft. Careful. His childhood home looked like any suburban house: white siding, a cracked driveway, a rusted basketball hoop still hanging above the garage. But I could see how it haunted him. His mother answered the door. She looked smaller than I'd imagined, like grief had shrunk her. She didn't hug him. Just stepped aside and said, "He's in the back room." I waited in the car. He was inside for 2 hours. When he came out, he looked like someone had scooped out his insides and stitched him shut with thread too thin to hold. Did he say anything? I asked as we pulled onto the freeway. Caleb was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he cried. He said he was sorry. Then he told me he still doesn't agree with my lifestyle. I gritted my teeth. That's not an apology. No, he said. But it's the best he had. He didn't cry. He didn't break. But when we got home, he held me like I was the only real thing left in the world. After Ohio, something shifted in him. He started writing more. Raw, sharp pieces about growing up gay in a house where silence was a weapon. I read every word. I cried through most of them. One night, he handed me a printed manuscript. "I want to publish it," he said. "You have to," I told him. "It might hurt people. It might save people." He looked at me. "Will it hurt you?" "No," I said, and I meant it. "I want people to know how far you've come." He kissed me so softly, it felt like a promise. The book came out 6 months later. The Son Who Died and Came Back Anyway. It exploded. Not bestseller explosive, but loud enough to find its way into hands that needed it. He got invited to do readings, interviews, panels on queer mental health. People cried when they met him. Hugged him like he was air. But not everyone loved it. His mother sent a short email. "This is not how I wanted us remembered." He didn't reply. But that night, he sat on the floor of our living room, his arms wrapped around his knees, and whispered, "I'm not sure who I wrote this for anymore." "You wrote it for the boy who couldn't say any of it back then," I said. "You wrote it for the boy who wanted to die." He looked at me, eyes glassy. "Then why do I still feel like I'm drowning?" I sat with him. I didn't speak. I just held his hand and let him be. Because healing isn't linear. And wounds don't always close just because the world claps for you. That summer, he took a break from everything. No readings. No interviews. No press. We road tripped to the Grand Canyon, slept in the back of our beat-up car, made love under stars so bright they looked fake. It was the happiest I'd seen him in months. He started smiling with his eyes again. And one morning, over bad hotel coffee, he said, "You ever think about getting married?" I choked on my drink. He laughed. "Not now. Not even soon. When I imagine my life 10 years from now, you're still in it." That's all I meant. My heart could have burst. "I think about it too," I whispered. We didn't speak for a while after that. But our hands found each other on the table. Held tight. Then, the call came. From his mother. Again. This time, her voice trembled through the speaker. "He's gone." We drove back to Ohio the next day. She hugged him at the door. This time, he hugged back. I watched them from a distance, heart aching in ways I couldn't name. At the funeral, people stared. Whispers followed us like shadows. But Caleb held my hand the entire time. When they lowered the casket, his mother slipped her fingers into his. Later that night, she told us she'd read the book. All of it, she said. It made me angry. But it also made me proud. Caleb didn't know what to say. So he just cried into her shoulder. Grief changed him. Not like a storm, but like erosion, slow, steady, impossible to stop. He was gentler. Quieter. But also more grounded. Like he'd finally made peace with all the pieces of himself. One night, we sat on the riverbank again. Not the Mississippi. Not Chicago. Just a small stream outside town. He skipped a rock across the surface. "I think I want to propose," he said suddenly. I stared at him. He smiled. "Not now. But someday. When I know I can do it without crying like a loser." "You'll cry anyway," I teased. "Probably," he agreed. "You." "I'll cry harder." We laughed. Then sat in silence, watching the water. And for the first time since I met him, I felt like we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something real. Something worth staying for. Something called a life. It didn't happen the way people write about it. There were no fireworks. No sweeping string music. No elaborate speech in front of a crowd. It was raining. Soft, warm, summer rain. We were sitting on a bench near Lake Michigan, huddled under a shared hoodie. Caleb's hand was cold in mine. He kept looking at the lake like he was searching for something. "You know," he said suddenly, "I used to think I'd die young." I didn't interrupt. I used to count the years in reverse. Like, okay, maybe I can make it one more Christmas. One more birthday. One more lie. He laughed quietly. "But then I met you. And suddenly the years started stretching forward. Like. Maybe I could actually grow old." I turned to him. His eyes were glassy. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small black box, beat up and scratched like he'd been carrying it around for weeks. "I don't have a speech. I don't even have the right words. But you make me want to live, every damn day. Even on the bad ones. Especially on the bad ones. So." He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring. Simple. No diamonds. No engraving. Just us. "Will you marry me?" My throat closed up. My chest felt like it would split in two from the weight of it. But my answer was clear. Solid. Strong. Yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, hands shaking, and then pulled me into him like the world might vanish around us. The rain kept falling. But it didn't feel cold anymore. We didn't rush the wedding. We didn't want to. There were therapy sessions to continue. Loose threads to tie up. Family members to face. We told my mother over lunch at her apartment. She cried and hugged us both, even called Caleb Khan. My father didn't attend, but he sent a quiet envelope weeks later with a check and a note that read, "Be good to each other." It wasn't love. But it was something. We invited his mother too. She came, dressed in a pale lavender suit, and cried the second she saw Caleb in his suit and tie. She didn't say much, but she held his hand during the ceremony, and that meant everything. The ceremony was small. Just 20 people. Friends from the bookstore. A few of my classmates. Our therapist. 2 cats in bow ties on a cake topper. We wrote our own vows. "I don't promise to be perfect," I told him. "But I promise to stay. I promise to fight when it's hard. And to rest when you need me near. I promise to love you through all the fog." He wiped a tear and said, "I promise to hold the light when you forget where it is. I promise to be the river, and the rope. I promise to love every version of you, even the ones who tried to leave." We kissed under fairy lights, surrounded by people who clapped like we had just taught the world how to breathe. Marriage was strange. Not because we didn't love each other, we did. Desperately. But because being seen really, fully seen every day. It's hard. Some mornings Caleb woke up too tired to speak. Some nights I couldn't sleep because I was afraid he'd vanish if I closed my eyes. We fought sometimes. About the dishes. About work. About how loud I played music while he wrote. But we always came back to each other. One night, during a fight over absolutely nothing, I said something cruel. I don't even remember the words. I just remember the way his face cracked. "I need air," he said, and grabbed his jacket. I sat on the floor of our apartment for hours, staring at the front door, terrified he'd never come back. He did. With tear-stained cheeks and a bouquet of gas station flowers. "I'm not good at this," he whispered. "I'm scared every day. But I still choose you." I pulled him into my arms. "Then let's keep choosing each other. Even when we're scared." Years passed. We changed jobs. Moved into a bigger apartment. Adopted a third cat who hated everyone but Caleb. He published a second book. This time, about healing. I started working at a mental health nonprofit, talking to queer kids who needed someone to tell them they could stay. That there was a way through the dark. We weren't rich. Or famous. Or particularly extraordinary. But we were alive. And that felt like the greatest miracle of all. 10 years after he pulled me out of the river, we returned to that bridge. It was fall. The leaves were fiery red and gold. The air crisp. I could still hear the water below, rushing like it remembered everything. We stood in silence for a long time. Then Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Faded. Water damaged. It was him, at 17. Hollow-eyed. Barely hanging on. "I used to hate this version of me," he said. I looked at the picture. "I don't." He turned to me. "Why not?" "Because that boy didn't give up. He held on long enough to save someone else. And then he let someone save him." We stood there until the sun dipped below the trees. Then we threw the picture into the river, not out of anger, but out of release. Letting go. Some stories end in tragedy. Ours didn't. We lived. We chose to live. Every single day. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was. There were nights we broke. Days we stumbled. Moments when the past crept back in like fog under the door. But we never stopped reaching for each other. Never stopped pulling one another back to shore. Because in a world that tried to teach us we didn't belong, we found a way to make a home. A hand in the dark. A heartbeat against the silence. A reason to stay. He didn't just pull me out of the water. He made me want to live for the very first time. And every day since. The end. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.